Assalamu alaikum, Hassan Saab. Thank you so much for joining us today. So right now, floods are happening both in north, in places like Gilgit-Baltistan and KPK. And they're also happening in south, in cities like Karachi. So my first question to you is that why do you think that such different parts of the country are flooding at the same time?
This is a system which is called Monsoon, and this is a large system. It covers all of Asia, all of from China to Far East to places of Japan, then Burma, Thailand, Singapore, and all the way to Pakistan along the Himalayan mountains from Karachi to. So this is a large system, and it's a global system. So it's not at all surprising that it is covering not just all parts of Pakistan, but so many parts of India simultaneously, so many parts of China simultaneously. So this is a global system which is just doing what it had been doing for the last maybe 30 million years.
And it's something that needs to be analyzed differently for all regions because it's something that impacts all regions in a very different manner. So, my second question to you would be that how much of this crisis do you think is related to climate change? And how much of this crisis do you think is actually related to poor and weak policy making, planning, and governance?
This is a very good question, actually. Uh, it is to some extent related to climate change as far as the system and these clouds are concerned, but not entirely to climate change. The current monsoon, which we feel is slightly heavier than what we experienced in past few years, is because of not exactly climate change, but because of a phenomena which happens in the Pacific Ocean, which is called ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation. This ENSO has three kind of positions. One is La Nina, another one is ENSO neutral, and another is El Nino. When El Nino consists, and it has to do something with the temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. So when the Pacific Ocean becomes very hot on the surface, this is El Nino conditions. It basically weakens Asian monsoon, and we are part of Asian monsoon. And so neutral conditions, our monsoon is good, and La Nina conditions, our monsoon gets pretty strong. And now, recently, from ENSO neutral, we are entering into La Nina conditions, which is making this monsoon stronger. And these cycles of El Nino and La Nina, they are not on a very regular frequency, but average 3 to 5 years or 5 to 7 years, they shift between each other. So we have come out of that El Nino cycles, and now we are entering into La Nina cycles, which at this point, the current models are telling us that will likely to persist for at least one more year. So if we are getting a very good or a heavy monsoon this year, so likely there is a similar kind of monsoon we are expecting next year. And then if the conditions they go back to and so neutral and then back to El Nino, maybe few years later we will be getting much less rains. So it is not just that it's the climate change, it's that ENSO cycle which is primarily causing it, but then ENSO cycle and its intensity is definitely impacted by climate change. So if it was not climate change, maybe we would be getting these heavier rains, but slightly less heavy. But this is the cycle of La Nina, which is primarily responsible for heavier monsoons. So just putting it everything on climate change is may not be entirely correct. And then you mentioned about the governance part. Well, uh, all the flood damages that you are seeing right now is almost entirely due to governance. It has nothing to do with the intensity of rains, because these intensity of rains are of course high, but they are not abnormal. They are not unprecedented. This kind of flooding we have seen before, this kind of intensities this region had been witnessing before. But why it is more visible and more destructive, or at least it looks more visible and more destructive this time around, I think there are two reasons for it. One, that just 10 years ago, there were not as many video cameras in the pockets of the people as they are now. So every time there's something dramatic happens, it is caught on some cameras, and whatever is more dramatic just gets viral on the social media and is seen by all. Uh, I mean, I remember my childhood, or even my youth age, when we would go to these mountains and stuff, and some old man in his 80s or 90s would tell us that, hey, you see that mark over there, 50 years ago there was a flood water that was rising that mark and touching that mark, and we would be surprised, oh wow, this is such a wide valley and there's a small river, and to that extent it was all water. That looked unbelievable. But then, as a geologist and as a hydrogeologist, we learned how to go and see a mountain, a stream, and look at the footprint, which is geological footprint, and the size of stones which you see on ground, what forces moved those stones, brought those stones at a certain place, from where was the parent rock from which it broke off, how it rolled, what rolled it, how much energy of water was there. So then we define that, oh, this is a high energy stream. This can bring that much of water. Even without any recorded data, we can approximately tell, maybe with an accuracy of 80 to 90%, that this stream can have that much of energy in a flow, and that size of debris would actually be flowing in there. But now our job has become much easier because of these recordings by the people, because we have seen mud flow, muck flow, and the flows where big boulders and stones are moving. So now, before we had to tell people that this can happen, now people can see that this happens. So it makes our job much easier. And the destruction is primarily, I think, because of our bad development models, because we have gone too close to those streams. Like a couple of years ago, I was traveling with my friends in this Naran Valley, which leads all the way to Babursar top. And we were surprised to see it's a very wide riverbed. Even a blind person can see that the marks of the river, the extent of the marks of the river. But on the side of the road, every now and then we will come across an area where a boundary wall was being, set up, within which they were filling the area to raise it to the level of the road. And then in last few years, those areas have been converted into tourist spots with hotels and motels and parking places and stuff. And we can see that if there is a stone on the side of the river, which is, say, 1 foot in diameter, it's rounded. It didn't, fell from sky. It was brought there from with the forces of the river. That means the extent of the river flow with its energy level has already been marked there. But when you ignore this, you don't understand this, and you just put construction and facility there, and that thing happens. Maybe it happens once in 100 years, or once in a 50 years time. That has happened, and then that tragedy takes place, where people with their properties, with their vehicles, with their loved ones, children, and everyone, they come in that deluge, and there's nowhere to go. So it is basically all the and leaving aside northern areas, come down to Islamabad. What happens? You see this very famous Saidpur village. You see there are cars being washed away in a stream right in the center of the market. And if you look at that, there are two walls erected within a waterway, which was very clearly marked by nature. It was reduced to 1/10 of its size. So uh, it is the room for the river that has been encroached in. Everywhere that you see, you are too close. Your construction is too close to the river. I think that needs to change now, and that needs to change now very seriously, because now we are losing lives. I mean, there's no price we can put on any single life, let alone hundreds of lives being lost at one locality in one event. This is not acceptable. We have to get very serious about it now. Yes.
You also mentioned that, of course, like this is not the first time that Pakistan is facing floods. In 2022, also we had extremely devastating floods. But why is it that we're always so unprepared? And what warnings or reforms do you think that we can actually adopt to make a difference?
Look, as far as adaptation is concerned, I think we are still living with the mindset of the 20th century and the first half of 20th century, where after the successful completion of Hoover Dam, the mankind or the human beings, they thought that this is that now we can conquer nature. But nature is still bigger than us. Not just bigger than us, much, much, much bigger than us. And today's global mind is to respect the nature and adapt with the nature. The terminologies has evolved and changed. Before they said flood control, then they said flood management, and now they say flood adaptation. And I think that is the most sustainable mindset, that we must adapt ourselves to the floods. What we need to do in Pakistan is we must leave room for the river, which is not a rocket science in the current knowledge base with modern tools of computing and data collection and satellite imaging and numerical modeling and climate modeling. All those things combined together can give you the zones of flood hazard. And within those zones, you have to adapt accordingly. Like, for example, I had some experience of working in some advanced countries where these modern thinking, where this modern thinking has evolved. What they do is they say, okay, if this is a zone where every 5 years flood will hit, you will not construct anything permanent in this area, but you will still use that zone because in once in 5 years, only in the flood season, this place will be flooded. What about the rest of the 4 years and 8 months? You should not just leave it alone. You can still use it. You can put there trekking areas, bicycles and jogging tracks, bird watching areas, submersible pathways, and things like that. So when flood happens, nothing happens to your infrastructure, and very little infrastructure is built, which is all of the standards of being submersible and then recoverable. But then you enter in the next zone, which is say the 20-year zone. There you can do maybe construction. Maybe you are allowed to build your houses and stuff and things like that. But again, because you know that once in 20 years you could be hit by floods. So, for example, basements are not allowed, which could be flooded. And every house that you build where the residents are supposed to live should be built in a double story fashion, so that when the place is submerged with flood, there is an upper story where you can easily survive. And there's a specification of the upper story and the lower story, that in the lower story, any electrical appliances and things, they should be waterproof. And then on the upper story, you should have complete essentials available in that accommodation, like a kitchen and a working washroom. And then when there is a season of flooding, the residents are aware of it, and they can, for example, store more rations for them and stuff. So, and communication and alternate energy systems. And even I've seen that people actually keep boats in those areas so that in case of emergency, they can still move around. So, and then within those areas, one that every household does its own flood adaptation. Then for the community, what they do is they create areas which are higher than the flood levels, and they convert into like sports arenas, sports grounds, or even schools and colleges and community buildings. They are built in those areas. They are built a bit more expensively because they are raised and they stay above the flood level. And in case of an emergency, for example, the emergency level is, for example, green. So you don't have to do anything and you can stay in your home, but be prepared. But if the emergency level is orange, then you have to move your family to an emergency shelter. And the family would know that if I live in street number one of in house number three of street number one, I would move to area where there is the school number four, in which barrack number five and room number six is dedicated for my family. And then there is whole emergency setup in which there are registered volunteers who would actually manage so many things, and they are from the community. So there is full-fledged community involvement, plus an oversight and support by the government. So it is not that like there's a wrong perception in our country that probably if anything happens, it is the duty of NDMA to move from Islamabad, go to a certain area, and then do all the research and relief and rescue operations over there. No, the community involvement is the foremost. So that is the kind of adaptation that we need to do on the community level. And then the planning, it has certain layers. And the last thing that you do is relief and recovery. So it starts from the awareness, then the planning, then the within that planning specifications, then the mechanisms of early warnings and everything. And last, that after passing through all these lines of defense, if somebody is still hit and needs to be rescued, then those rescue forces would kick in. And finally, once you rescue a person from a certain locality, where that rescue team would go, which is the hospital, which is the area where they get relief, how the medicines are managed. So what we are seeing right now is that all the other layers or the lines of defense, I would use this term, lines of defense, all the lines of defense are missing. And the last line of defense, which is relief and rescue, the only thing that we see is there. I mean, I appreciate our relief and rescue teams, from Pakistan Army to police forces to paramilitary forces to the community volunteers. Everyone is doing a wonderful job, but their job would have been much, much, much reduced if other layers of defense were also in place. So we are starting with the last line of defense, and probably that is our only line of defense currently. This has to change. This has to, transform into a very different way. And all these things are not a rocket science. I mean, educating the community is not difficult. Uh, I mean, of course, our society is less educated than a society in the West. But I tell you that if you call the head of a family and explain him that if the siren is like this, or mobile phone signal is like this, or a hooter is blown like this is what you have to do in order to save your family. So I think we can do it if we start thinking on
Thank
those
you so
lines.
much for this extremely insightful analysis. I think it also boils down to the fact that we need to actually start prioritizing adaptation and giving adaptation more funding also, because we see in our federal budget as well that often mitigation and mitigation projects, they get more funding than adaptation. So my next question to you would be that in your view, are provinces like Sindh, KP, and Gilgit-Baltistan getting the resources and support that they need from the federal government?
Of course, these adaptation plans, they need funding for everything. But I think the first thing the funding should go into is the planning. And planning means every area, every district, every stream, every village beside that stream is different from the other. Everything is unique. So there has to be a hierarchy of planning and instructions which should be implemented, first planned, then implemented. And the planning involves, like, a framework is given by, for example, NDMA sitting here in the federal capital to all the provinces. And within that framework, all the provinces should develop their provincial policies and plans. Then the next level is district level. Then from within a provincial framework, the district should do its own things. And from districts to municipalities down to every single village. And that uh, planning should keep on involving people down to every family which is in a certain hazard zone. And that the way this planning is to be done, the way zoning should be done, that should be given by the higher ups, and then it should be implemented by every municipality. So it is basically the local governments and the community which has to ultimately work together within the framework given by the higher echelons. And that is where the first round of funding should go. And it should be made mandatory for every municipality to submit their plan before the next onset of this flooding season. There has to be an urgency in this. And even if you do nothing, you don't modify your building code, you still have the houses there right next to the river. You may still be living in a shelter or in a house which was rebuilt after this year's flood destroyed it, and you built it at the same place. But if even only if you know that you are in a zone which is under threat under certain conditions, and you just have that early warning systems through your mobile phones or through sirens or alarms, that thing can still be managed and implemented within our own resources without any external funding, I think, to the communities which are in the vulnerable zones. And the awareness through media and through schools and through community institutions like mosques and places of worship, and that must be there for in every, for example, congregation of Eid, where the whole community gets together. In the religious sermon which is given, people are made aware that, well, we are a community, we live together, and we have to be aware of these things. So there are so many community events in which you can actually explain and make the community aware. And I think with the invention of this social media and current technology, I think this job is not at all difficult, let alone impossible. So we can do it.
And do you think all the provinces such as KPK, Gilgit-Baltistan, and Sindh, are they getting equal support when it comes to the resources that they need to tackle climate change?
I think where there is a will, there is a way.
Yeah.
If a local government is interested in saving its citizens, it will manage it. That management is more dependent on your will to do it than the funds you need to do it. Funds can be created, funds can be accessed, and funds are there. It's not that the funds are not there. We have so many funds. We have so many things. For example, uh, we made some wrong decisions a few years ago. Uh, we created, we put billions of dollars of investment in the projects which are not climate compatible. Two particular projects, one in this Swat River area where Bonir and all those things. We are building a very large dam over there. Hundreds of millions have already gone in last 7 or 8 years. But what did the community get out of that investment to be safe from this recent thing? If the same money was diverted into giving room to the river, because we learned these things in as recent as 2010 floods, and we are making decisions into 2018, which are again on the structures which are climate incompatible. And then there had been some very misleading reports in the country, like we will run out of water in 2025. And based on that, the people who actually sort of got that report created out of nowhere, no scientific data, nothing. And then that report was made, I mean, blown up in the media. Even the Prime Minister of 2018 made a national address and said that we are going to run out of water in the country in 2025, and therefore we need to build dams. Those dams have not been built, and 2025 is here. We are drowning in water, and the investment of billions of dollars, which is planned for that thing, and out of which hundreds of millions have been spent, are spent on climate incompatible projects. If the same money would have been diverted into climate compatible projects, making the society more resilient and based on the science of ENSO and La Nina and La Nina and climate science of changing climate, heat, energy, blah, 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 room for the river, and projects like this, I think these tragedies could have been avoided in that region of KPK where we saw the most devastating damages. So I think it's now time that we get very serious about it. We should not be our decision makers should be careful, and they should be capable enough to sort out what is real and what is unreal, what is being pushed by the interest groups and what is being pushed in by the real science. If our decision makers have a mechanism to sort out from the right investment to the wrong investment, they can differentiate between the two. I think that would save many lives in future. But if we still have the same kind of mindset in our decision makers, which can be easily fooled or tricked by the lobby, they show you a report which is based on pseudoscience. 2025, we are going to run out of water. You know, I mean, something which is scientifically impossible. They built everything on that, do the wrong investment, and at the end of the day, hundreds of lives were lost. Now, this is too serious. We just can't afford another folly like that. So we have to be very careful.
Like you said, when there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
You could not have summed it, you summed it up in a perfect manner, and you're so right about that. That when there's a will, there's a way. And all the reforms that you listed, if we actually start from the first line of defense that you mentioned, such as awareness, planning, risk mapping, of course, a change can come back. A change can come by. I think it's only a matter of time that we need to realize that climate change is something that needs a holistic approach. We need to stop operating in silos. We need to stop, thinking that, okay, this province will solve its own issue. It's just that we all have to come together to solve it. So another question that I have from you is that what solutions or reforms do you think can happen immediately to protect the vulnerable communities who have faced the floods right now?
Okay, the most important and the most immediate thing is basically relief and rescue. So those people who have been displaced, those whose houses and living places have been devastated by these floods, one of the most important thing is giving them shelter, giving them food and medicines, and giving them clean drinking water, and making sure that they get enough food, health and hygiene. And after this, the next most important priority should be we should reestablish the schools for the children which have been lost, because community education should be our top priority after maintaining a healthy body. That should be our next top priority. I think this is the most important thing, and we should start investing in our people, on the people who have been specially impacted on these things. After that, we should start looking at how the overall planning to face the next inevitable disasters should get into place. And that planning starts right at the center in organizations like NDMA and other bigger echelons where the planning starts, and it should trickle down all the way to the local government level and the community level and down to household level. So those are the lines on which we have to work. It should be done in a way that if, for example, by next floods, at least the flood hazard zones are marked. Whether or not you are successful in relocating the people and businesses from the most vulnerable zones is a second priority, but at least that marking should be there and the community should know. Community, most important, the community should know. And I tell you what, there are challenges in that. And that is where our leadership and our top decision makers should make sure that this doesn't happen. Because again, we cannot allow any interest group to play with the lives of the people.
So my last question to you would be that actually, I think you've already answered it because you said that zoning and mapping is the most important thing that we should do before the next year monsoon, which was actually my last question to you, that if there's absolutely one step that you think must be taken before the next year monsoon, what would that be? Would that be zoning, planning, and mapping the vulnerable regions?
Yes, I think I already elaborated on that. That before the next disaster hits any area, and it's not necessary that it would hit the same areas, the areas which were hit in the previous monsoon. The next monsoon could be as similar as this one, but the areas, because this phenomenon of cloudburst, that is something that is very important, that we should understand how our system works. At least at the planning level, our experts who are doing all those planning, they should know that how our system works. And one of the things they should know is how that very intense shower of rain comes in, like we experienced in Chakwal, like we experienced in parts of Islamabad, like we experienced. I mean, those are not very large area. I mean, those are quite localized things. And if it happened in, for example, over a catchment which was in DHA 5 in Islamabad this year, it might happen in a catchment which is on E11 next year. It's the same thing. So it's not necessary that this would be a very large part. But when a small part is impacted by a very heavy shower, what happens? So every part within the municipalities should prepare as if what happened in, for example, DHA 5 this year will happen to them next year. So that kind of level and that understanding should always be there, because this cloudburst phenomena is very difficult to predict because it's a very localized phenomena. And in order to predict, I mean, scientifically it may be possible, but practically it not may be doable, because the amount of data, for example, for a so-called cloud burst to happen, it not just involves the size of cloud. Uh, it also involves a lot of factors which are happening on ground, from air temperature to topography to soil moisture to vegetation type to air direction of air, the differential of air temperature close to the surface and up in the clouds, and the size of cloud and everything in a very small locality. Now, we do not have that kind of instrumentation that can do everything. And then there has to be an algorithm which takes all this data and then calculates if a cloudburst is going to happen or not. So it is not practicable even in the most advanced countries, where they can kind of predict a cloudburst of the size that happened in Bonaire or on a locality in Islamabad. But if people know that this thing can happen, and these are the 3 months within which this can happen, and within these 3 months, it will only happen when the cloud is big. So people are prepared. So you are most devastated when something happens which you are not expecting and you are totally taken by surprise. So if you just avoid being surprised, I think more than half the damage could be prevented. So that's the kind of things that we need to immediately do as the first step before the onset of next season.
Thank you so much. I think it's time that we all step up together, including the people, community, government, institutions, everyone, because this is something that we will face every year. Thank you so much, Hassan Saab, for your insights. Thank you so much for providing us with such a detailed analysis and for providing us with such great information. Thank you.